Hello, and welcome to the 20th video in this series, Reflections on the Bhagavad Gita. In this particular series, I'm looking at chapter 16, the first 3 verses, which are also called the godly qualities. Now, if you haven't already, take a look at the introductory video it's the first video in this YouTube list of videos. It tells you what I'm up to here. It allows me not to have to repeat a lot of information at the front of each video. They're fairly lengthy as it is right now. I'm running around 40 minutes to an hour, depending upon the subject matter. Now, the other thing, if you've either looked at the video intro or looked at some of these before, and I do kind of encourage to take these in order because I'm kind of constantly referring back to things. So, but again, your choice as always. But you should know that we always start with a chance to just let some of the cares of the day and everything that builds up in us. In fact, given some of the words today, couldn't be a better introduction to that. Depending upon your method of coming to rest, I happen to use what was called the exercise from the School of Practical Philosophy, but there are even apps for your phone now that would lead you to guided rest. But whatever method that you're going to use, let's just come to rest for a few seconds here, okay? There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Good. And as I said before, I mean, to do that right, you'd probably need about 2 or 3 minutes, but that really does not make for entertaining video. My suggestion is always kind of stop the video at that point and really come to rest, and let's proceed from there. Now, as it stands now, and let's just hold these up here. These are my notes I had put together a few months ago. And you may see that there's 2 words on this page. Modesty, translated as gentleness, and ri, translated as modesty. As it stands right now, I'm planning to do both words in this video. It may or may not work. Unlike some of the other words, I wasn't a lot coming out of this. So, that said, and since these reflections are meant to, kind of let's at least stay true to form, take a look at the English translations, and let's see what comes of that, okay? So the first word, madhavam, gentleness, is really madhava. I mean, we talked about all of the vams and twams and things that get put at the front and back of words just to kind of finish them off, we don't say I run, you say I ran, running, and certainly any language has the kind of the need to take the base word and put stuff around it. So madhva is the actual word that we're speaking of here. And it says, after getting done with all the kind of dictionary stuff, softness, literatively and figuratively, pliancy, weakness, gentleness, kindness, leniency towards all beings. So right away, the first thing I'm hearing here, of course, we had compassion to all being. Here is leniency towards all beings. Now, as you know, if you're a regular viewer of these, I think I'm up to 2.5 viewers. The cats sometimes watch these at night, so I count them as a half, okay? So we have mrid as the root, and that is to be gracious or favorable, pardon, spare, to treat kindly, make happy, rejoice and delight. You should feel better already just after hearing that, okay? And I'm going to go on to the other word because I don't know, we may be jumping back and forth. So, ri is actually its own word, doesn't have any in the way that I've parsed them out over here. So ri is to feel shame, blush, be bashful or modest, be ashamed of anyone or anything, to make ashamed, cause to blush, confound or put to shame. Going to be a toughie, given that it's 2020 in America. I may have to just go to the English dictionary and remind everybody what these words are in English, because it's certainly not in our common vocabulary these days. And finally, a second definition. Actually, excuse me. Ri is itself a root. Okay, so I'm not going to give you a root. I'm going to give you a second definition here. Shame, modesty, shyness, timidity, also personified as the daughter of Daksha and the wife to Dharma. And Dharma, we remember, is lawfulness. I'm not sure about Daksha. So leaving aside that second one for the moment, let's just start with gentleness. And I love also that somewhere out to be gracious, to pardon, to spare. If you were doing this at, let's say, a philosophy school, which is where I picked up a lot of this, you would actually let run in your mind the words. So you would just repeat Maradwa, Maradwa, and see what that did, because those sounds will have an effect. Okay? On the other hand, and I think there was one other word that had that with the English, that even in English translation, there was great beauty to this. So we're talking about gentleness here. And who does not want to be treated gently? I smile every once in a while in between these things, because as they go on, as we've talked, mind is universal. Yes, you have, quote, a lot of stuff in your head, but one of the reasons why we can also understand each other is it's not just the language. We have the whole universal human mind behind us, so that we have the shared knowledge of I'm not really sure how long humans have been around in the current form with language, but it's been a while, okay? And so, things come by here, and we have, something like gentleness. You see, and it comes back to me too. That's the beauty of it. Gentle treatment. Contrast that with some of everybody's favorite tasks, going to motor vehicles or going to the Social Security office, or anything where you have a great bureaucracy of people who have little interest in you. And this is not to say that there aren't some heroic people in each of these places. But by and large, if I gave the list of places where you would go for good and gentle treatment, I'm pretty sure motor vehicles, Social Security, unemployment office, all of these places would not be on the top of the list. When we think of first of all, when we think of gentleness, depending upon how your home life was. I mean, for me, it was could never wait to get back to mom and dad's house, because that was love and care and gentleness and free cooked meals too. So we have this idea of kindness and softness. Now, interesting word that's also in here, weakness. And it's also funny because, and I give it to you as it is. I'm not, trying to spin this a certain way, but I also don't see anything in the root. The root has again, this much more gracious note to it. Pardoning, sparing, to treat kindly, make happy, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. You've got this real, again, we had Shanti, we had peace. So you have this wonderful gentleness, and yet we still have this idea of weakness in there. And I may have to come back to that, because when I put these all down, this was done before the current American campaigning got going, and I know that there's certainly any number of ads right now to portray Joe Biden as weak. And we generally, despite the fact that we would look at this and say softness, kindness, leniency towards all being, we certainly don't normally mix weakness. You know, a person can be kind without being weak. And in fact, if you will, the stronger you are, the better able you are to be kind, to be considerate, to be lenient. Now, when I say strong, I'm going to go back to what I've been saying about, kind of saying all along, a definition of weak. Let's start at the physical world, as we've done. You know, if I go to the gym, and I don't know what's open in gyms, but, you know, I expect to see a bunch of people pumping weights. And if I go out to we have all these trails out here, people running, I expect them to be in good physical shape. I expect them to be strong. A weak person physically would barely be able to get up out of their bed. And the same for the level of the mind and the heart. A weak person, if a weak of mind person, right, is somebody who any thought comes by, they're taken away. I mean, it's funny, the next word is fickleness after this. But, you know, you say, well, why is that? Well, they're weak. That's my definition of weakness, not able to stand for a second in the blowing winds of the mind. And make no mistake about it, the mind is it's churning a lot. That's why we start with a little break in here. So I may need to come back again to the weakness, because none of these other words around it go with weakness. Just the way it is, just what I'm seeing right now. However, you know, when we talked in purity of being, purity of heart, about people who were filled with grace. Here we're talking about being gracious. And yeah, so a bunch of guy goes, and he laughs a lot. But that's what happens. The gracious part of it, and I think I have mentioned the head of the school in New York for a very, very long time, wonderful lady named Joy Dillingham. She since retired and went out to New Mexico for health reasons. But probably a more gracious and in one way gentle lady you will never meet. And on the other hand, I would not put weak as was for her. But the gracious part reminded me of being the head of the school. She always was hosting various people coming in. There would be people who'd want to know something about it, heads of other schools or what have you. And she wasn't a big eater herself. And left to her own devices, she would probably be happy with a little salad and a bit of tea. She was from England, a little tea and salad, and I don't know if she ever ate crumpets, but she would be done. Now, the kind of the rules of etiquette around eating is that if the host stops eating, everybody else stops eating. Now, she was well aware that other people ate more than she did. And so whenever the places were set for whatever the guests were, Miss Dillingham always had a bowl of almonds or some sort of nuts, whatever she happened to be craving at that point. I don't think craving goes with her either. And what that allowed her to do after she had a bit of tea and her salad and maybe a crumpet or so. Now, the rest of the people around her are in the middle of the meal, and, you know, and of course people are taking away the plates and putting down other ones, but they never took away the thing of nuts, because that allowed her to sit there and she would always either have one in the hand or ready or chewing, and that allowed her guests to eat. And that, I don't know if it's gentle. I guess it is certainly gracious. And I guess it is gentle in that you're not getting this, well, you all got to do what I'm doing, like a certain other office holder who I'll leave for now. But I mean, there is a level of, again, we're back to care, treating kindly, delighting, and not making, not a harsh. I mean, if I'm thinking of harshness as the opposite of gentleness. But what a beautiful example, just one teeny little example of a bit of gentleness, a bit of graciousness, a bit of kindness towards those around you. And I'm going to keep repeating it in all of these videos. It's not just that the words are beautiful in themselves. It's not just that they're a bunch of things that you post up on the wall, kind of like we were talking about the Ten Commandments. Well, the Ten Commandments make a nice little thing in the church so they remind people, but unless they're put into actual practice, it's not much use. You can take the Ten Commandments and chuck them out with the garbage then. None of this, none of what's being said, even for me saying it here, I would be a hypocrite of the first order if I were to say that, yeah, listen to it, but, it doesn't apply to me. Of course it applies to me. It applies to every one of us. And doubly so, actually, to me, because I've had the chance to hear these and reflect upon them. And it makes sense. And why, as I've also asked, why wouldn't you be gentle and gracious and lenient? And the leniency, I don't know, all of these things, I've had I guess it's both the good fortune and the bad fortune of hearing so many stories. I've read you Zen stories. Obviously I read from the Christian Bible, certainly reading from the Gita. The poems of Rumi are being another great place to. I mean, there is no lack of material. The Upanishads, even the story that the Gita comes at, the Mahabharata, is a fantastic story. And if that doesn't kind of lift you up a little bit, you might as well call the Undertaker at this point. But here we have kind of a way. Excuse me a second. Speaking of having things at hand here, I always have my glass of water at hand here. I'm especially careful not to be coughing anywhere today. But, here we have this idea, this quality, this godly quality, which again I say is a human quality, of bringing some sort of rest to people. I mean, if I'm in the Army or the Navy, and I'm a new recruit and I go into boot camp, I expect the drill sergeant to not be exhibiting these qualities. It goes with the turf. Most of us aren't drill sergeants in the armed forces, so there's no need for us to treat people with a harshness of that level. Again, we mentioned the gym before, maybe, when you're trying to get somebody motivated. But even then, what it would have behind this is the end goal in sight of trying to bring this person to a better state. So I'm going to hold it there, because what I still keep coming back to is this whole idea of how weakness got in there. And I might need to just do something on that, because I'm not catching where graciousness, treating kindly, gentleness, pliancy. Now, pliant may have a little bit of that in it, and weakness is generally considered a bad thing. He's pliant, he's weak, can't stand up, he's got no spine. So I'm not understanding that. So I'm going to say, let us come back to those other definitions. Now, we go on to the next word, modesty. Okay. My. I may have to, for the next 5 minutes, just look at these words and shake my head here. I don't know that we're now in September 2020. As I say, I come to you from America. I don't even know if these words, if being modest, if being ashamed of anything, if anybody blushes about anything anymore. I rather think that some of these actually fall more into the whole idea of weakness and of pliancy. And again, I try to stay away from the political, because I kind of would like to not get shot on the way home. But certainly President Trump, the words "to feel shame, be bashful and modest" probably never enter in. And in fact, usually, as we see in the news, as soon as something is done, as they say, doubles down on it. That's as political as I want to get here. Again, I value my life, and right now, America is on fire, unfortunately. So when we come to this word "ri," and we say feel shame, be bashful or modest, that I think is in most people's mind linked up to that, to the weakness and pliancy, and the yeah, it's a tough one. This is probably the first time I've come across a word whose meaning, whether it's, well, I mean, certainly in Sanskrit, but its meaning in English translation is so turned around from it's not that the meaning is turned around. I mean, feeling shame, being modest, being bashful, being ashamed of something, is still means what it means. It's just out of practice for almost all of us. And to even suggest in this day and age that there is something that you might need to atone for, you might need to be ashamed of, is considered a sign of weakness. And so we have somehow or another flipped some of these things around. Now, C.S. Lewis, in addition to, most people know C.S. Lewis for Narnia, Screw Tape Letters, which I know very well for, as I keep plugging my Screw Tape Returns along the line here. But he also wrote what was called the science fiction trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. That last one, That Hideous Strength, is, now again, he was one of those people who could see, given, almost given an acorn, could see the oak tree that would come from it. And he's writing the science fiction trilogy, I think was done in the 1950s. And he's writing, even before NGOs was a non-government organizations, the Lincoln Project or Ameripac or whatever these organizations are. And one of the things he writes about is this kind of, I would call it the anti-schoolers, and again, a very secretive government organization. And what they were up and about was a number of things. But one of the things that was behind a lot of what their work was and what they were trying to get across is, it's funny because it was that there's no right and there's no wrong. And so they had what was called the objectivity room, and they would put, you'd have a wall just like this wall in back here, And the fireplace, there would be a fireplace in it, and instead of being in the center of the room with something on each side, it was slightly off center. And then there were patterns of stuff on the other wall, and they were almost patterns but not quite. And the idea was to instill upon the people who are attending this organization that there isn't anything that's right, there isn't anything that's wrong, and it's only a matter of opinion. Now, I have certainly said that enough times in these that, here in America, maybe land of the free and home of the brave, but it's also the land of, who's to say what. I was at lunch the other day, and at the other table, and they were at least talking about it objectively, but at the other table were a bunch of people, and, when I said, well, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? And, and I always say, yeah, up until we come rob your house, then all of a sudden right and wrong start to have meaning. But in this, going back to Lewis's story, the idea was to kind of pull out the anchors. If you look at all of these words as anchors back to godly qualities, well, one of the way to dehumanize somebody is to cut all the bonds to everything that make you human. And so if we call these also the human qualities, a gentleness, a gentle touch, non-harshness, modesty, actually being able to feel shame at something that you did, which is, as I say, it just doesn't even happen. Most people, if you say, are like, well, too bad, and it immediately goes to a very defensive mode. So I'm not, this one's a stumper, because again, like giving, like even being gentle, we have some experience, but as the experience of modesty, I mean, if you just take a look at what people, going back to lusting and coveting, what people are after is not modest. It's sometimes pretty shameful. I mean, and look at all of the, and I don't know why it's the rappers or hip hop or whatever, but every video they're always drinking. I think Crystal Champagne was the darling for a while, but it's, and cases of it. I mean, and there's always this kind of excess about that success in America, that making it is about, there's nothing to be ashamed of. There isn't anything to be ashamed of in being a success, but not every action is unshameful. So I let this one run for a little bit on the first part, because what we're doing 2 words, and number 2, just wasn't sure where this is going to go. This may be, I kind of get the feeling even in saying this, this may be a little bit all over the place. So what we're going to do, because we're 28 minutes in already, going to take our part 1, part 2 break, as we always do. I want to reflect upon this a little bit more. I'm not sure I can get an answer to the weakness question as to why that's also given as a definition of gentleness. But I'm certainly going to take a little bit of time with this. Let's see what we got. Let's see what's, I got to go back to Shankaracharya's commentary and see what was said there. So, a few minutes for me, a couple of seconds for you with a little part 2 coming up, and we'll be back in a few seconds, okay? Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of this video. We are looking at 2 words in this. We're looking at madhvam, gentleness, and ri, modesty. I'm going to have to come back at some point. I mean, it just makes me, and I do this online. I mean, I do have the physical Sanskrit dictionary, but it's a bit of a bear. So, as I've mentioned before, Sanskrit may be considered a dead language, but the internet has done wonders. So I can take a look at the entire Sanskrit dictionary. There's just some great sites out there. Just Google them and you'll get to them. But I'm going to need to look at madhva a bit more. That was the gentleness, because I am, as we said, kind of puzzled with the whole weakness thing in there. Now, going back to the second word about about shame and modesty here, that one again, I think we have enough experience with to kind of continue the discussion a little bit here. And again, at a certain age, you just cannot recall everything. But I think maybe 20 or so years ago, somebody named, I think it was Bloom, there were a bunch of books about American literacy, not that, but like things that people had forgotten. And around that same time, there was also, again, don't remember the author's name, but we're talking about moral compass here. And the reason why I just spent 2 minutes here trying to get to the moral compass is because in order for one to feel shame about anything, or to be ashamed of something, you would need to have kind of something to compare against. Now, I have mentioned a few times that the second series is going to be on chapter 2, verses 62 and 63 of the Gita, which was that whole kind of decline from once the senses get attracted, once we get to that coveting state, all the way to the utter ruin of a person. Well, in between, one of the steps is once we start forgetting, once we, I ended up the first half of this, we're talking about breaking the bonds to what makes you human. Well, that is loss of conscience, okay? That you had an inner voice or a moral compass. Now, I'd have to go back and look at this book because, again, the difficulty with some of these things, and I even have to be careful myself, is you kind of get a little bit holier than thou attitude about this. We're like, well, you're not moral, but I am. And that's not the case here. Again, it has to be living. The rule that, or the action that may have been absolutely wrong for person A, 20 minutes later may be right for you to take with person B. But that needs you to be awake, aware, listening, seeing, and not having lost all of these qualities to be able to act from there. My suggestion is, as I always say, the sooner we get to that, the better everybody's life will be. I could cry at the difference between what we are living through now and what life could be on Earth. But again, that's a whole other series of videos. But this kind of idea that nothing is shameful, that there's nothing to be modest or bashful about, first of all, I think is a modern idea for the everyday person. If I was a king in France, if I'm Napoleon, leave that aside. I know he was an emperor. If I'm Louis the whatever number, and I'm not good, and I've been to Versailles, but that's what we're going to talk about. Let's say it's the 15th or 16th who put together Versailles. Beautiful place. Love the fountains and stuff like that. If I'm the king, by nature, since I pretty well think I'm divine anyway, these bashfulness, Versailles, modest, right? These don't enter into the picture. Now, for the common person at that time, which could explain the French Revolution very nicely, right? For the common person at that time, they were worried about, you had to send your 3-year-old out to steal some bread so everybody could eat. I mean, you're talking about this large difference between the haves and the have-nots. I think we're kind of getting there again, but let's leave politics and finance and stuff out of this. However, what I do think has changed is the common person, the everyone, is we're all kind of think we're little kings and little gods ourselves here, and that nothing's too good for us, and that, you know, we don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed of anything. And again, the difficulty with all of that, and why, by the way, and I go back to C.S. Lewis's trilogy there, why it's called that hideous strength, because there is nothing stronger than a lie that's based upon the truth. And that's not an oxymoron or anything else like that. All you have to do is stay very, very close to what's true and just twist it a little bit. And you've got almost the full power of the truth, because that's, of course, where the actual power is. And so, you know, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again in these. You want to have, we just did coveting before. You want to get yourself a nice new shiny red Corvette? More power to you if you can do it. If you want, I mean, you know, when we go out in the country and drive around, I don't mind where we are living and stuff. It's beautiful. But it doesn't mean that you don't drive by and go, wow, that's a nice house. Gee, I'd like that. We've said that, you know, as long as it's just at that level, that's okay. But when it gets to the point where, you know, anything goes, if I'm either coveting, envying it, or have to have it, and I don't feel any shame about, you know, who I have to step on to get, you know, I'm gonna, again, I said I've corporate America for 40 years. Lucky I have a soul and not more gray hairs than I do. But I mean, you know, this whole idea of anything goes, I don't care who I step on to get to the top, it's all about me, as we like to say, I think is now so common that somewhat explains why me sitting here going, let's talk about shame, let's talk about blushing, being ashamed of, modesty, okay? Whew, I might as well just cut the video at this point and say, yeah, we really can't go anywhere with you. We need a lot more reconnecting to our humanness to get to the point to understand what this is. So I think I will pick this up. Just notes for myself here, right? I'm going to have to pick up the whole weakness thing in gentleness and pliancy. And then here, as far as shame and modesty and blushing and bashful, I think that will come up and be better seen. I mean, again, these are, you know, verses, and not every one of them is going to be a winner for the method that I picked here. But I think that this will end up better when we talk about that downward spiral where the covetousness turns to envy, to greed, to ardent, I love that one, ardent longing, so much so that you start plotting how to get these things by hook or by crook. I think that will play better when we look at that downward spiral in chapter 2, those verses 62, 63. I read a good portion of that so that you would understand what I keep referring back to here. Now, I just want to, while we're on the subject here, though, take the few minutes to talk about modest. And, you know, again, it's kind of, it both fits and doesn't fit. Now, we are familiar with the word in a couple of ways. One, as far as the one thing that I think of is dress, okay? Is what you're wearing modest? Men tend not to have the same thing. I mean, first of all, for half of us, you know, what I'm wearing is what I call the uniform of the day. But the idea of modesty in dress, I think that's even more recent than everybody not feeling ashamed of anything. And so we kind of have this idea of how you are presenting yourself. Are you presenting yourself modestly, or are you presenting yourself shamefully? And that's gives you a little hint of how much we've lost, where somebody said, you know, somebody would be able to say, you know, they are dressed shamefully in a way that brings shame upon them. And trust me, I know a lot of people who go, there's no such thing. There literally isn't such a thing as too shameful a dress. And that's where we're at. I'm not even going to go back and forth. I'm lucky I can get these out and not get, I can hardly wait to see the comments on this. But, at this point, the idea of shame, blushing, and bashful or modest is so foreign to us that the best I can do with these videos right now is say the words and then run for the hills, because people this is not popular. I mean, I can go on about giving, I can go on about purity of being, I can even do a little bit of not coveting. But this stuff here, this is America. We have, at least supposedly, God-given rights to do anything that we pretty well feel like doing, Anyway, that's just my take on that. And again, getting a little too opinionated here. But as far as modest goes, I think that at some point or another, as I said, I've been very fortunate to have traveled quite a bit. At some point or another, we were in California. You got to take the Hollywood, tours of the stars' homes. And it was kind of interesting to see some of the homes of, let's say, TV personalities, or even now with a lot of TV shows being done out of their homes, that in some cases, or it may just be just money itself, but in some cases, we saw homes and it was like, wow, you wouldn't think somebody as either rich or famous is living in such a home. And, then the words, of course, that would come to your mind would be modest. That's a modest home given, now again, I don't know people's stories. You might have lost a lot of money on investments, what have you, or they may have genuinely been like, no, this is enough. And that's fine. Again, nothing wrong with a nice house, a nice car, a nice boat, if that's the way. But when it gets to be beyond the need, when it gets to be, I'm going to make my neighbors green with envy. I mean, there's the thing. You've got people so weak that they fall into coveting and enviousness, and you're going to add fuel to the fire. So it's an interesting mix. It's, at least for me, been a difficult thing to even talk about, judging by kind of how this has been going. And the best, as I say, that I can do is let's just say these words. I wouldn't start here for, what's the first exercise we're going to do to try to pick up these things? This is not the place I'm going to start, because this is a tough nut to crack with the way that we all think right now. And again, it's one of those, it's that hideous strength, that right next to the truth of that, if the creation is said to have any purpose at all, it's so that I always say the absolute God, whatever, can enjoy himself in as many ways as possible. And that's the truth of the matter. That's why you've got mountains and trees and birds and fish and all sorts of things for us to do, which cause no harm to those around us. But that's not enough, No, that's not good enough. We got to just run it up to the extreme. So I wouldn't start there as far as saying, well, what's the first exercise I should do? I think, there's a couple of them, and I think that the one which goes actually back to the gentleness, leniency towards all beings, compassion to all beings. We talked about feeding each other, So let's be gentle. Let's say that we've heard about modesty and shame and all that sort of stuff, but let's be gentle, gracious, and kind. Make people happy. Now, you really can't do that in a way, but you can provide the conditions that their natural happiness will come out. So we did get through gentleness and modesty, a bumpy ride, to be sure. But I think of all the things that we're going to look at here, and that includes the next verse coming up, I think of all of them, modesty is probably now the most foreign to just about any human being on the planet. And we'll come back to that when we look at, lack of control of the senses and stuff like that. So with that, what is that? Make happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Take it from there. Okay. Was that my reminder for cat video? Don't forget there's cat videos out there on the internet. See, there's another. Wait. See, I know I never finish these things, right? Why do cat videos make everybody so happy? Okay? And I don't mean the ones where they fall into the water. I mean, people like watching cat videos, dog videos, and stuff like that. Nova just had a thing on about the cats and how their sound and their purring and everything is, humans really like that. It keeps them happy. So, I mean, I didn't even know I was recommending cat videos for that reason until we got to this word here. But in any event, have fun, be kind, be happy, treat everybody as yourself they are, and be kind to yourself and yourself that you see in others. So until next time, joy.